The trailblazer in a transformational setting is a person who's prepared to go where no one's gone before. They don't have maps. Indeed, they are the map makers. A trailblazer, all a trailblazer needs is a clear sense of direction. Which way am I headed? Which way do you want me to go, Mr. Jefferson? He said, go west to Lewis and Clark. He didn't say, now go to the first road and turn right and then go to another road and turn left. They didn't have global positioning systems, but let me tell you what they did have, the North Star. So they didn't know where they were going to be tonight, but they knew which direction to head tomorrow morning because they had some signposts. And they understood the signals, and they understood the habits of nature. They knew which way, they knew water ran downhill, and they knew there was a divide, and if most of it was running east, and sometime you're going to get to a divide and it's going to run west. And so they had some clear signs, but they didn't know where they were going. Trailblazers are independent sorts. And quite often what trailblazers do if they don't have good leadership is they blaze trails all over the place, and some of them lead to some place and some of them don't, but they serve no good end. They are personal direction as opposed to a collective direction. So the trailblazer is a character that's very important in this operation, but don't think they're the only important character. There's a lot of other important characters. Too often people, when I made this presentation 25 years ago, saw this person as a hero in the play. This is the one that was the most important. Hell, they're a pain in the neck. Quite often they're distractions because they get bored. They want to go ahead. They're not really particularly working with other people. They want to do it alone. And what they really want and what they really need is some degree of praise and honor for being so brave. They love to create rendezvous, you know. They come back to the rendezvous and man, you don't know how tough we've had it. Behind the trailblazer comes the pioneer. The pioneer has a lot of characteristics in common with the trailblazer. But the pioneer has to know that the place is worth going to. They're going to have to know enough from the trailblazer to say, is there water out there? Is the land pretty? And Daniel Boone had to say Rebecca. Rebecca was the pioneer in the family. Daniel was the trailblazer. And Daniel had to come back and say, Becky, that Kentucky country is beautiful. He didn't tell her how poor it was. He just said, it's beautiful. He said, and you'll like it. And there's a lot of free land out there and all the things we've always wanted. If we can just get there as a family, we can settle and we can get things you value. Now the pioneer's ready to go. They don't have to say how long is the trip going to take. They don't have to say how many people are going to get killed on the way. They don't have to say, can you get there? Well, Daniel said, yeah, you can get there. I got there. Blaze a trail through the Cumberland Gap. I know exactly how to get there. And I got a place picked out where we can build a fort, and on and on and on and on. All that stuff is taken care of so that the pioneer says, I'll go. They don't need a lot of assurance that anybody else is going on. Quite often pioneers come in very small family groups, little intimate clusters. Ever sound like school to you? Those few people who go away to a workshop and get all excited and come back and they want to take the trip. And they're all excited about it. Now everybody else kind of watching what's going on. Behind the trailblazer are the settlers. Now the settlers, they're most of us. Settlers are a brave lot, but they got to have a lot of questions answered before they go. If we take this trip, if we start to transform ourselves, if we really start trying to think about ourselves as guides to instruction, and if we begin to say, how do we provide instruction for people if we don't provide it? What would our school look like if we organized it this way? And they start asking those questions, they want you to have some answers. Because they're not going to go on a trip until they know how many beans we're going to have to take along, how many days it's going to take. Just how many workshops you see I'd have to go to? Now, how long is it going to be before this is implemented? What happens if the principal leaves? I've heard the wind blow before, so now we got another person comes in with another hot idea. And so and I got to have all that answered if I'm going to move the settlers. They need an awful lot of support. They need a lot of encouragement, some of them more than others, but they need to understand that there are things here that I need, that if I don't need them, I don't see them. And by the way, are my friends going along? I'm not going to go unless there's a wagon train. Then there's stay-at-homes. Stay-at-homes are people that don't want to go themselves. They don't mind if you do. They might even cover your class for you while you're off to those workshops. They say things like, you know, we went through this too. And that's part of being young, you know, you got to have this. We did some of this. I remember we had this wild-eyed principal came in here with the idea of doing X, Y, or Z. And I got sucked into it, and I did it. And it was kind of exciting for a little while. You know, I was thinking of my grandfather. You know, I had two, like most folks, I had two grandfathers. One was literally was a village atheist, and the other was a local fundamentalist Methodist preacher. Now, if you think that wasn't an interesting family talk at Thanksgiving time. But the village atheist grandfather was very conservative, very moralistic, very strict, probably more so than the Methodist preacher, by the way. But he and I would have great discussions about this and that and something else. And I went away to Ohio State University, and I went back to graduate school at about the time Bob Dylan was starting to groan and moan. You know who Dylan was. And he was singing all these songs, and we were growing beards, and you know, up until about the late 50s, in a small town in Ohio, you just didn't have anybody with beards except the Luden brothers, you know, people, Smith brothers on the Luden cough drop box, but people just didn't grow face hair. But then it became a mark of protest to grow face hair. And so, not to be outdone, I got my sandals, and I got my beads, and I got my beard. And I couldn't wait to come home to my grandfather, who lived across the field from us. They'd built a house right down the road from us. And so when I came to my parents, the first thing I did was walk down to my granddad with my flowing beard, because I knew he was going to raise hell. You know, I mean, I knew he was going to have all kind of ugly things to say to me about my beard. And I couldn't wait, because then we get into a great debate about freedom and, you know, all the stuff we used to discuss. And he had a habit, you know, I was old enough at that time that he taught me the art of drinking what I call a poor man's Manhattan. He made dandelion wine. Now, if you've never tasted dandelion wine, don't. But he would take half a water glass full of dandelion wine, which is sweet. Then he'd pour the rest of it full of the cheapest bourbon he could buy and pour it in there with no ice. And you're supposed to drink that and say, boy, that's good. And so he'd always toddle over and get it out of his cabinet and pour it, and we'd sit there. And I kept talking to him about this and that and something, waiting for him to say something about my beard. And finally, I got enough of the dandelion wine in me to get up my courage, and I said, Granddad, what do you think of my beard? He said, well, everybody's got to have something to be ashamed of when they get older. Well, he was a stay-at-home. You can grow a beard if you want to. I'm not going to. The last person, you know, I remember, you know, some of the old boys in the 1880s and 90s and 1900 had beards. But that's over with. And if you want to do that, go ahead. But you'll get over it. Stay-at-home is a relatively harmless sort. There's one behind them that's not so harmless, and that's the saboteur. The saboteur not only does not want to transform, he doesn't want anybody else to. And he's opposed to it, or she's opposed to it. And they spend their time trying to lay traps to make sure that you don't make it. Now, one of the dangers, of course, and I'll talk about this later in another context, one of the dangers is too often we confuse saboteurs with people who, in a prior campaign, were trailblazers. And they got betrayed by their leadership. And they say, get me once, shame on you. Get me twice, shame on me. I've seen this stuff come and go. And so we look at them, we think they're saboteurs. But they're really very potentially trailblazers again, if we can just light their fire right. But we need to think about that. Another thing we need to think about as we look at the stay-at-homes. The stay-at-homes won't cause you any trouble unless you start putting pressure on them to change. And then they'll join the saboteurs. If you're going to go after, and if you go after the saboteur first, then as a stay-at-home, I'm going to say, if they're going to make old Harry go, you know they're going to get me. So what I better do is join a coalition with Harry right now and stop this mess before it gets too far down the road. And so you wind up, if you're not very careful, in the early stages of a change process or a transformation process of creating resistance to change by the way you deal with the saboteurs and the stay-at-homes. And if you deal with them too aggressively, you create more resistance rather than less.